All right, good evening. Good to see all of you. Welcome. I know we've got probably a few that are joining us live. I do know we've got folks traveling for different reasons this evening. It is the summer after all. Some that have left have come back, and those that were here have left. So it's just kind of one of those things we deal with. Mentioned that Melanie, our extraordinary, otherworldly secretary, is under the weather, we might say. She's battling a sinus infection and is at home. Usually she tries to get us like an announcement sheet together. Well, that didn't happen. So I'm going off of the bulletin here. I made a few notes just to share with you a few things that some of which will not be in your bulletin. We got a call from Jeff Bass today. He mentioned to me, and some of you may know Neely Luna here in town. Neely's sister, Rosie Daniel, has been diagnosed with cancer, and he's asked us to put her on our prayer list and to be praying for her. Dean Bowling, I had a chance to talk with her. Dean is doing okay. Her pain level is nowhere near what it was after she fractured her wrist and dislocated and did everything you can do to her wrist in a fall. The surgery went well, and she was kind of herself when I talked to her. So she appreciates all of the attention and prayers that we've given her. Robbie Guthrie spent some time out here at STRHS, but she was released yesterday. And actually today, it was today she went home. And she's got some doctor's appointments coming up. She's going to be spending a week with her daughter. She was looking, though, for a ride in the morning out to the health department. And I'm not sure if she's gotten one yet. But hey, if that's something you think you can do for Miss Robbie, she's got to go pick some dentures up. And it's like important. Okay, so if there is someone available, just give her a call. All that's in a recent email. Andy Lee had a recent checkup, and Andy was, this was concerning his 2020 diagnosis of kidney cancer. We are, of course, ecstatic to report that Andy was pronounced cancer-free. And this is what you like to hear, that he won't have to have a checkup for another year. So that's good. And some of the other stuff that he's battling, that's also at bay at this point. And so he's obviously thankful and continues to appreciate all of our concern and our prayers. All right, got a couple of things upcoming here. Tomorrow is a Tweens Day, and the plan is to meet in the church building at 10 o'clock a.m. for a devotional here at the building before heading to Mount Zion to play in the creek. Transportation is not going to be provided, so families will need to carpool in order to provide their own. Drinks will be provided, but if you're going to want to pack your own lunch, okay? And then this Sunday is Songs of Summer finale. The plan is to meet in the parking lot at 5 o'clock p.m. to go eat in Florence before the singing, which will take place at Sherrod Avenue Church of Christ. You're going to want to need to bring money for supper at either Five Guys or Blue Coast Burrito. Jeremy may mention a little more about this, but Jeremy is not going to be here. Jeremy's going to be traveling. He's going to be averaging maybe about 700 miles a day in his Tahoe. Between here and Bozeman, he's going to see a lot of really cool stuff out west, and it's just going to be he and the missus. They're going to be on a big circle here. But he won't be here. Scott is going to be taking the teenagers that show up down there, and Scott, I'm coming too, okay? So if I need to drive the minivan or whatever, I can do that if we have an overflow, but I'm going to plan to catch that. I hadn't had a chance to go, so that's what I'm going to do. That's all I've got. There may be some other things that we could mention. There are some things we've had up on the screen. Jeremy may have something else to share, but I'm going to give it over to him right now.
Good evening. We are thankful that you are here. And Katie and I just decided like a week ago to make a trip, and we've got 7 days. And so we are going all the way up through South Dakota, over to Bozeman, Montana, down through Yellowstone, through the Grand Tetons, down, hit the Arches, go through the Gunnison, Black Canyon of the Gunnison. We're going to hit a bunch of national parks and drive 700 or 800 miles a day and camp out of our car. It's going to be awesome. We've got 1 hotel room. And if you want more details about that, you can ask us when we get back, because I don't really have them all yet. But yeah, we're really looking forward to it. We got our route mapped out and all that, and but it's going to be a lot of driving and no kids, because there's no way that we could do 5,000 miles in 7 days with 3 kids. So I did want to mention again with the Tweens Day tomorrow, our 2nd grade and down. If you got older kids that want to come, they are welcome as well. But again, transportation is not provided. But it seems like every year we have some, and a lot of times that includes the Garguses, that forget to bring a towel. And if you don't bring a towel, you're going to have a car that stinks. So you might want to bring a towel. Also to that tomorrow, in addition to bringing your lunch, we'll have a cooler with some water and Capri Suns for the kids to drink and for the adults to drink as well. All right, let's all stand up. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. All right, y'all can have a seat. God sent judges over Israel, 1 great woman, 14 men. They helped Israel fight their battles, led them back to God from sin. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jer, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, Samson, Eli, Samuel. I started counting wrong there at some point, and I would have wound up with 16. But it's Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jer, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, Samson, Eli, Samuel. All right, y'all got all that right? And I did ride roller coasters most of the day yesterday with some of our teenagers, and I screamed a whole lot, mostly like a little girl. Because that's the way I prefer to do it. I love them, and my voice is still a little shot. Let's go through those names one more time. Y'all ready? Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jer, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, Samson, Eli, Samuel. All right. If there was ever anybody right now, for the moment, that I feel like could really help boost it's because of the goodness going on there, Andy Lee. And if you want to bring a child with you, what a great report. How awesome that is. Yeah, bring them all. Yeah. Let's get them up here. So happy for the great report that Andy got. Yeah, just bringing them all up here. I like it.
Just stand in front of me.
And I knew if I said something about this beforehand, you'd have said no. And that's why I like doing it this way. Just put them on the spot and they can't turn you down. All right, y'all ready to boost? Booster, booster, be a booster. Don't be grouchy like a rooster. Booster, booster, be a booster and boost our Bible school. Booster, don't be grouchy like a rooster.
That's it.
Booster, booster, be a booster and boost our Bible school. Booster! Great work. And one of you escaped. That's all right. We'll see you later, Titus. Booster. All right. Again, thank you all for coming. And at this time, we will let our 0 to 24 months, their parents, take them to their classes.
I would say if you're having like a bad day and you're needing a pick-me-up, probably one of the smartest things you could do is go to our YouTube channel and type on play, hit playlists, go to the Wednesday nights, and just survey what's happened in that little children's time. There's been a lot of funny stuff that's happened. I love, though, that Titus is like, I'm out of here. And he just ran, right? There's been some good stuff. So we are continuing this series on the story of Ruth. There's, in the summertime, there'll be maybe some romance-like movies that come out that the ladies like to watch. And every now and then the man, just to make his wife happy, watches the movie and finds himself actually enjoying it, but not that he would admit that, right? The story of Ruth, it's got some romance to it, right? I mean, it is a love story. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, it is the lily in the mud pond of Judges. And Judges was a brutal, horrible, like New York Times bestseller of probably the crime thriller genre, maybe action genre, and then you got this like romance novel that comes from that same time period. Here is sort of a breakdown of the story of Ruth, and I covered the prologue, those first 5 verses, along with some introductory stuff a couple of weeks ago. Then Dad came in and took over scene 1 and got you from verse 6 to verse 22. Chapter 1 starts in Bethlehem, moves to Moab, ends back in Bethlehem, okay? And it covers a time period of over 10 years, okay? A decade or more is what's sort of covered for us. And here's a little thing to remind yourself about this, well, the Bible in general, but certainly a short story like this. The Bible's language it's very selective what they cover. I mean, we're like, well, what happened in those 10 years of anything of interest? No, it doesn't cover that. I mean, can you imagine how big the Bible would be if someone tried to give us an exhaustive account of every historical, like a diary of everything that happened in David's life on this day and the next day. Imagine how enormous and unwieldy the Bible would be if it wasn't selective, right? And that makes us, I think, or should make us appreciate the contents of it even more. Like, this is here, and it's in here for a reason, so how about we pay attention, right? So there's like 10 plus years going on in chapter 1, and then you get to chapter 2. And chapter 2 is going to begin in Naomi's home there in Bethlehem, and then it's going to move to Boaz's field, and then it's going to finish back at Naomi's home, and it's going to cover one day. One day. And then there is the little tag in verse 23 that tells us that kind of what happened all the way up until the end of the harvest. So really, from the end of chapter 1, and if we bring in verse 23 of chapter 2, you're covering a time period of about late April, early May through the end of June. Okay? So let's get to it. What I want to do is I want to just break down this scene. I got 3 things we'll highlight from the story itself, and then I've got, hopefully before we end, I got 4 lessons from the field, as we'll call it, because the bulk of this narrative here in Ruth 2 takes place out in a field, okay, out in Boaz's field. Verses 1 and 2 bring before us Ruth's, I'm going to call it, courageous initiative to glean for food. Okay? So, I hope you got your Bibles. I'm not going to have the text up here as much, but if you got your Bibles, you can turn to Ruth, or you got your phone, you got that YouVersion or some other Bible app, you can tap in your phone to Ruth. You want to get to chapter 2, beginning of verse 1. And we get this sentence that sort of raises a first-time reader's hopes. It says, "Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz." So Boaz, it's the first time we hear about him in the story. He's introduced as a worthy man. You will find that same adjective used to describe somebody like Gideon. In some context, it's like a man of valor. It's like a military connotation. Other contexts, it speaks of a man who has a special talent of some sort. And then in other contexts, it's a man that has means, that's kind of wealthy. And the point, I think the NIV says he was a man of standing. Like, I'd like to be a man of standing. How about you? And well, what does that mean? It means he was kind of a pillar in the Bethlehem community. He was well respected, and I think this text bears out, he was probably quite wealthy according to their standards of that day. I mean, he's got his own field. He's got his own people working for him, his own servants and harvesters and things like this. The beginning, now see, the end of chapter 1 tells us that they get back into Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. And this barley harvest provides Ruth with an opportunity to go and glean in someone's field and thereby benefit from someone's generosity. Now, this whole gleaning thing, how many of you have ever gleaned a field? I haven't done it. I mean, generally, you're going to have your harvesters going through here, and they're going to be whacking at these stalks with one hand, and they'll be gathering them in the other hand. Okay, and some of the ladies would come up and they would bundle those things in sheaths. All right, so you can imagine. I mean, we do the hay thing. We got those huge bales out there, but if the man is whacking at these stalks, and as he's trying to gather it, and some of the gleanings fall out of his hand, we have Old Testament law that says what? You leave it on the ground. Why? Well, let's read it. I want to flip over here and just read a little section of Deuteronomy 24, verses about 19 through 22. Okay? Because Ruth's sort of subsequent activities, this is a good background for that, as to what she's looking to, I guess, in a way, take advantage of. It says, "When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field. You shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. It goes on to talk about the olive trees. It goes on to talk about the vineyards and how they are to offer, or at least make available, some of their produce for these poor people, for the most vulnerable. I mean, you know, and I mean, think about Ruth. Ruth has got this on two counts, right? Not only is she a foreigner, but she's also what? A widow. Okay? And I said that going into a field would have taken some courage. I want you to, as best you can, I want you to imagine that you're in Ruth's shoes. And she does get up and she says to me, she takes some initiative here, right? We're going to go. We're not going to go hungry because I'm going to go out and I'm actually going to try to get us some food. And this is my plan. And Naomi says, "Go and do it, my daughter." And so she's going to go out into this field. I mean, she is going out into what to her would be strangers' fields. She doesn't know anybody. She knows Naomi, and she has enough awareness. Ruth isn't dumb. Ruth knows that she is a foreigner, that she is in someone else's land. In fact, Ruth has to know Moab and Israel have not always had the best relationship. You do recall where Moab comes from, don't you? I mean, the guy Moab that brings about the people of Moab, I mean, he was the offspring of a drunken, incestuous relationship. I mean, and they're like inveterate enemies, Moab and Israel. And so here she is. She's somewhat recently widowed. She's going to go out in a field. Now, what kind of people would you be gleaning? Like, what kind of people do you imagine are going to be coming through the fields trying to pick up whatever they can? You think it's going to be like the most upstanding people of society? You're going to have some poor people, right, who might be desperate. You might have some foreigner that like committed a crime somewhere and that's just doing what? He's on the run. He's just kind of making his way through there. But you just got to imagine all the scenarios. And beyond that, I mean, she even says, doesn't she, to Naomi here, she says that I will, let me go to the field and among the ears of grain after him whose sight that I find favor in. One of the things we have to remember is this is taking place during the days of the judges. And you got questions about how many people are actually going to be obeying the Lord in doing what? Leaving these gleanings in the first place. And then how many of them are going to be stingy and greedy and get mad at or berate or abuse those that are trying to find food for themselves? I mean, this is a time when everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. So this was a kind of a scary proposition for her. I mean, she's got to be very vulnerable. And she's going to go out here and she's going to do what she can do. It's to be admired. Yes, her courage is to be admired. Her initiative is to be admired. And then we get kind of the bigger part of this story, and that is Boaz's incredible kindness toward Ruth. His kindness, I would think, certainly from her point of view, would have been a very surprising kindness. Let's start with this verse 3. I did put this up here. So she set out and went, and she gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Now, as a first-time reader, you already know a little bit about Boaz. What do you know about him? You know he's a worthy man. You know he's a man of standing. You know he's a good man. And you also know, unbeknownst to Ruth, that he is a relative of Elimelech, and thus of Naomi, and by extension, who? Ruth, because she married into that family. Now, was this
mere coincidence? Right? Or was this something Dad brought up last week? By the way, I went back and watched it, made sure we're not going to step on each other's toes in what we're doing, Pops, you know. So, but Dad did bring up that really important sort of discussion that comes really to the forefront here. Was it coincidence? Or was it divine providence, some way, somehow, right? Some commentators do downplay the theological significance of this phrase here, she happened to come, or some translations have, as luck would have it, of all the places she could have ended up gleaning, she ends up in this guy's field, who is a worthy man and happens to be a near relative, right? So you got that going on. So some do downplay this as being just, this is just chance, this is just coincidence. But then you got a whole other bunch of scholars who are like, no, this right here is highlighting the book's key, one of the book's key theological emphases, and that is this hidden, mysterious providence of God. How did Ruth end up there? How did she just happen? I mean, she leaves that day, and I'm telling you, it wasn't like, well, I got 2 fields to choose from here. I'm going to go to this one, 50-50 shot of getting a good one, right? There would have been all kinds of places. She could have went this way, she could have went that way, she could have gone over here. And you get the impression that these fields were kind of like, there were huge fields that were, that were owned by different guys in this field. And so she could have went to a different part of this huge field and ended up in a bad guy's field. Like, how did she get to his field? That's a great question. Text just says it just kind of happened. We'll talk a little bit about that more before we close. So let me just summarize some of what's going on here after we get through verse 3 there. Boaz's first words and the response that he gets from his workers is very telling. Again, text is going to be terse. How do we, when you're reading a book and you're trying to get a feel for a character, is this a bad guy? Is this a guy I can trust? Is this a guy that I'm not going to like? And so the first thing we get from Boaz is he comes into the field and he looks at all of his reapers and he says, "May the Lord be with you." And then all the reapers go, what? They answer back, "The Lord bless you." And then at this moment, and I think that's telling. I mean, I'm saying Boaz would have been like a good boss. I think you would have liked working for him, right? And then at this point, he notices that foreign woman, this woman that's gleaning in his field. It's picking up the scraps and whatnot. And he inquires about her, brings his foreman over there. And the foreman basically says, she's actually the woman that everybody in Bethlehem's been talking about. She's the one that came back with Naomi. And in point of fact, she came here early in the morning, kind of asked permission if she could do this. That was kind of polite, right? And she started working, and she's been working up until now, and she only took like a short little break. I love how Boaz approaches her. So I want you to imagine, okay? Again, we're going back. We're going to be in Ruth's sort of world here. You're out there gleaning in the field. You might have caught ear of that exchange between Boaz and his reapers, and then you see him talking to the guy you talked to earlier, and you can kind of tell that this guy that's just shown up is the boss of the guy you talked to earlier, and then the boss of that guy is doing what? He's coming to you. He's walking out into the field, and he's making a beeline for you. What are you thinking? How do you think you would feel? Would you be worried? Have I done something wrong? What's going to happen? Maybe I ended up in the wrong field after all. She's got to be a little unsettled as Boaz is making his way over to her. What's he going to say? And I love how Boaz approaches her. Boaz says, "My daughter." Now that does tell us that Boaz is probably a bit older than Ruth. So if you've ever thought that they were both like in their mid-20s something, probably not. Not in the case of Boaz. I mean, Boaz addresses her the same way Naomi addressed her when she asked to leave and go glean in the field. But that's disarming, right? My daughter. And then what Boaz is going to do at this point is, and by the way, she has no idea who he is. She has no idea who this guy is at this point. And from this point on, Boaz does nothing but shower Ruth with one kindness after another kindness after another kindness after another kindness. And with each kindness, I got to think Ruth is being more and more blown away. The kind of treatment she is about to get is not the treatment that she expected. I mean, maybe she would have expected some general good treatment, but I mean, Boaz is about to go above and beyond. And there's two main things that he is going to provide her with: sustenance and safety. Sustenance and safety. Isn't that awesome? Because I'm telling you, when she left Naomi's home, what are two things she wanted? Sustenance, food, safety, security, protection. You know, to feel safe. And a man whose eyes I find favor, whoever that guy might be. And so, what does he do? Well, in verse 8, he tells her, don't glean in another field. Don't you go. Don't you leave this field. This is the field you're going to work in. And they've been a large field. They're going to be gleaning for day on day on day. And he goes, you're not going to go anywhere. In fact, you're going to stay close to my young women. That provides her little social, solidarity and some protection. She's there among some fellow. She's not just out there by herself. He goes, I want you to stick close to my women. Okay? That's what I want you to do. And one of the things he says, and I've already told my men not to touch you. And that kind of reveals that sometimes the harvesters might want to take advantage of some lonely, poor, young, foreign widow out there in the field. And Boaz says, no, ain't none of that going to be happening here. You ain't got to worry about it. I've already had that talk with him, so to speak, at some point. One of the other things that's interesting here is so usually foreigners were to bring water to Israelites, and women were to bring water to men. And if you're in this situation, you would have to go somewhere and draw your own water. That's going to take time away from what? From the gleaning. What does he say? My men will be drawing some water, and you can drink from their vessels. That's awesome. You gotta love Boaz. You know, women say men are pigs. All men are pigs. Boaz is not a pig, right? And there's still some Boazes in the world. That's for the single ladies, right? Still some Boazes in the world, and guys, there's still some Ruths in the world too. And by the way, I'll tell you what's interesting. How many of you thought that early on, whenever Boaz took notice of her, it was because she was probably drop dead gorgeous, and that's why he's looking after her? One of the things that's interesting to me is that nowhere in the book of Ruth does it tell us that she was beautiful. Nowhere does it tell us what Ruth looked like. And what's fascinating to me about that is there are other passages in Scripture. I mean, think back to Abraham and Sarah. What did it say about Sarah? She was very beautiful. And if the text, to be balanced here, if the text wants you to know that a girl isn't so easy to look at, she has weak eyes. That's what they say about Leah, right? And it's easy for me to want to compare Ruth and Esther because they both have this providential thing perhaps going on, certainly in Esther, and I do think it's here in Ruth too, but one of the things we know about Esther is what? She was very beautiful. And I've often wondered, what if Esther wasn't beautiful? how would that story have read differently? How would she have ever ended up, what? Queen. It's amazing to think about, right? It never tells us that she's pretty. If there's one thing I think we're about to learn in just a second, it wasn't so much beauty or whatever that maybe got Boaz initially. It was Ruth's character. Some of the other things that we see here in the text about what he did for her, at mealtime rolls around, and he does what? Hey, how about you come over here and eat with us? That's pretty amazing. That's a big deal, share a meal. And he makes sure she's eating and eating and eating, and she has some left over, right? And she's going to get to take that home. And then just when you think the kindnesses need to stop for whatever reason, he goes some a little further instruction here. And in verse 15, when she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves and do not approach her. So, they're out here and they're whacking these things down, and these young women are coming and they're like gathering these up in sheaves. And he's like, I want you to actually take from that and do what? Make sure she gets that too, right? And then there's so we've seen the sustenance, we've seen the protection that he is offering her, and at one point, right, Ruth goes, why? Why are you doing this? That's a good question, right? He gets at motive. I love that Boaz doesn't come up and say what? Because I'm a really awesome guy, and you should get to know me better, right? No, he says, I know what you did. I know what you did for Naomi. I know that you left, probably a pretty comfy situation with your parents, or at least a familiar situation, for an unknown situation here in a strange land. And your commitment to Naomi is just amazing. And then he basically prays for her, right? And he says to her, the Lord repay you for what you have done. As if, she had done something and like the Lord bought a loan from her and had to repay her for something. And we do see, like Proverbs 19:17, that our generosity is kind of like a loan with respect to the Lord that He's got to repay in kind. And that you get a full reward given by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So he seems to acknowledge, and has some knowledge, that she has left those, like Shamash of the Moab, that God, little g, and has taken up here with Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, the God who is. She is amazed at this. And so then we get to the last movement here. And 17 through 23, I'm just calling this Naomi's burgeoning hope because of Boaz. So let's pick up there in verse 17. So she gleaned in the field until an evening, and then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. We really have no idea how much that is. We don't. People have tried to be like, I think it's this, let's do the etymology here. We really don't know. What I think we need to know is it was a lot. It was a lot. I mean, compared to what was expected. It's a lot of barley. And she comes in there, and she took it up, and she went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. And she also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. That was from that meal. And her mother-in-law said to her, do you think Naomi said, so where'd you glean today? Okay. Whose field did you go to? Okay. I think she's excited. But she's like, this is amazing. I mean, you said you was going to get food when you left this morning, but I mean, I did not expect this. How did this happen, right? Where did you end up? When have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. Naomi has no idea what's coming. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. Naomi knows Boaz. And said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness is not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. We're going to have to come back to that at some point later. We will. And Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young women until they have finished all my harvest. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with these young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. I'm thinking Naomi certainly wants her to keep gleaning in that field, not only because it's safe, but also because Ruth and Boaz are going to get to see more of each other. Right? And that comes out a little bit more in chapter 3. Yes?
I don't want to go too fast here on Boaz. Before we get Boaz, the perfect man of all men, this passage is constantly talking about people in Jerusalem, men. If you weren't in Boaz's field, you could be assaulted. You know, so I want you to understand, I think that men are still men back in this day.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Have the hashtag #MeToo movement. And also, I mean, you're going to get into it later, I know, but Boaz realized, as soon as he realized who this woman is, he realized that she's doing his responsibility. So why wouldn't he bless her?
Yeah.
Do everything he could for her.
Yeah, and it did confirm there at the end. We were trying to say, hey, it's a really good thing she ended up in this particular field.
This is other Israelites.
Yes,
Fields have been other Israelites.
that's right.
You would think God especially.
Yeah, and it's in the Judges period too, where it's even more chaotic and worse. Let me give you some lessons from the field. God has answers we don't know about. At least think about this. Chapter 1, what is Naomi saying to Ruth and Orpah? Guys, you need to go back. I got nothing for you. There's no future with me. I can't have more sons that you can marry and stuff. There's no hope here. It's worse than bleak. You know, you need to turn back and you need to go home. Right? That's chapter 1. And chapter 2 is like, you forgot about Boaz. Right? You forgot about Boaz. And to whatever extent we have God's providence at play here, here's just a point that you might be like, in some situation, you're kind of like in a Ruth chapter 1 situation, and you've concluded there's no way out. We're at an impasse here. It's impossible. Well, let chapter 2 give you some hope in the book of Ruth, right? Here's, that's the first bell. Here's the second thing. Faithfulness will always be noticed and rewarded. And I know I'm going to have to qualify this in kind of a churchy way, but I want you to, not only did Boaz notice and reward Ruth, but again, we got to be thinking that God is also attentive and knowledgeable of this Moabite woman and her character and her disposition, and that there is, we know this, right? By the end of this story, Ruth is going to be blessed, and Naomi is going to be blessed with way more than just food, okay? But then here's the caveat that we have to acknowledge. I realize that for many of us, we would want our obedience to have an immediate payoff, and we want maybe certain circumstances to change right now, or at least in the here and now. So when I say faithfulness will always be noticed and rewarded, the caveat is this. There are some devout, faithful, obedient people who have suffered mightily in this life. But we trust what? They are going to be rewarded. If not in this life, certainly in the life to come. A passage I really like along these lines, just to kind of remind us of this, Hebrews 6, for God is not unjust so as to overlook your work and the love that you have shown for His name in serving the saints as you still do. And then the text goes on to call us to steadfastness and keeping on till the end so that we might inherit the promises. Here's a third point. It's easier to steer a moving car than a parked car. So I want you to imagine Ruth and Naomi sitting in the home at the start of chapter 2, and they're praying diligently for food. They're starting to get a little hungry. The cupboard's looking a little bare. The refrigerator looks empty, and they're just praying, Lord, please bring us food, Lord. And then they get up the next day and they do what? Please, Lord, we would love to have some food. What do you think if they just chose to take just sort of an exclusive prayer route on this? Some would say, well, eventually God would find a way to get them. But what do we see from Ruth? We see initiative. We see her, she gets moving, right? She gets going. She's going to go out and do what? She's actually going to work. It's kind of like, you have these people that maybe they're jobless. I mean, a lot of people have been jobless. And sometimes they're like, man, I've been praying every day. I get up, I sit on my couch, I pray to God, I watch a little TV, and then I pray, and I'm praying for God to give me a job. And then you go, okay, have you put out any resumes? Have you had any interviews? Are you doing anything, right, to find a job? Well, no, but I'm trusting that God will get me a job. There is this balance that we have to understand here. Trying to move or help or whatever, direct or steer, as we're saying here, a parked car. I mean, it's really hard to do that. But when you get moving, God can bless your faithfulness, and God can bless your obedience, and God can bless your diligence and your initiative and things of that nature. And, I've often wondered, though, with Naomi, what if you could ask her, like, how did she end up in Boaz's field? Let's go back to that question. If you could talk to Ruth about this and say, like, imagine if we could take a trip and talk to Ruth right now and say, Ruth, how did you end up in that field? Do you think that she would say, well, I walked outside and there were these golden footsteps, like footprints on the ground. And I just started following them, and then it took me over here and it took me over there. And all of a sudden there was this big sign and it said, Ruth, this is your field. And I was like, this must be my field. And then I went out there and I started gleaning, and lo and behold, it ended up being the best situation for me. You think that's the answer Ruth's going to give you? Absolutely not. I mean, what do you think she's going to say? I walked out and this is where I ended up. I can't, maybe she can. I look in the rear view and I'm like, that looks like God had a hand in this or something, right? But I didn't really see it out my windshield. I kind of saw it in my rear view. I didn't see it in my windshield. I don't know how to tell you this happened, right? So we'll talk a little more about this. Last one. How you work says more about your Christian walk than how you worship. I know that's the second bell, but let's finish this right here. How you work says more about your Christian walk than how you worship. I mean, when we assemble in here, let's take the weekend on a Sunday. We assemble in here and we sing together and we commune together, and I preach and you're like, I'm trying to listen to you. And then there's prayer and we come in here. Here's the thing: it's really easy to look like a Christian in here. It's really easy to give everybody that's in here the impression that you are a Christian. But it's not so much in the church, in the assembly, where your Christian walk can really truly be measured. It's in the field. It's in the workplace. It's out there on the weekdays. It's like, how are you treating your clients at work? How are you treating your employees at work? I mean, what do people see when they don't see you in here, right? How you work tells us a lot more about your Christian walk than how you worship. It really is. That doesn't mean we're dismissing the worship side. It's just got to make sure that what's going on out there, right? What's going on out there is reflective of who we are in here among God's people. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to study another portion of your word, a great chapter from the book of Ruth. We look forward to further studies. Pray that you will bless us as we maintain our hope, as we continue to work for your cause, for our families. We trust that you are a God who provides, and we rest in that. We thank you most of all for your Son, and it's in his name we pray. Amen.